Before I get into the bulk of this video, I just want to say I'm going to be doing chapters going forward, so if you want to skip to the segment that interests you the most, you're more than free to do so. And then secondly, I'll be making sure to upload the whatever segments I do have in the shorts as well, so then if you want to just see a more TLDR version, you can just check those out as well. So make sure to look out for both of those going forward, and let's just get into this.
Three. He throws to the end zone. Davis 4-3 in the win. Oh, it's good. Crosby in on goal. Backhander. He scores. And good. 49ers win it.
I want to start off with the topic, which I think the majority of people are going to click on this video for, which is going to be Aaron Rodgers. There's a bunch of trade rumors with him, so let's get kind of straight into it. According to sportsline.com, the odds are negative 250 for the Jets to get him, plus 600 for Titans. Colts are plus 1,000, Raiders are plus 1,300, and the Patriots are plus 1,500. And right now, it's basically confirmed that if Rodgers is going to get traded, he's not going to go to an NFC team. The Packers want to trade him to the AFC at a cost. And then right now, what kind of seems to be the asking price is 2 first-round picks. And from right now, for just based on the rumors and based on what's confirmed, the New York Jets are the clear favorites to get him, just on the basis that they do want to they won't mind grabbing him for 2 first-round picks. Their owner has said so himself, and even Joe Namath will be allowing him to actually use his jersey, which would be number 12, just so they can get him, of course. Then, of course, they hired Nathaniel Hackett as our offensive coordinator. And I'm not sure if he was exactly the main reason why he had those 2 back-to-back MVP seasons. I don't know if that was Matt LaFleur either, but he was at least a contributing factor to that as well. But obviously, there's going to be a lot more other teams going to be interested in getting Aaron Rodgers' services, because it's still Aaron Rodgers. He won the MVP like a year ago still, so he's obviously still has something left in the tank. It's not completely washed, even though obviously this year the Packers didn't do so hot. He didn't look the best either, but there was a lot of different things with coaching, with how especially their young receivers were playing the first half of the year. There was a lot of kind of drops, a lot of miscommunications, of course. And then, so the other team that would want to get him would be the Tennessee Titans. I think that's an interesting pick just because I would imagine they would start Aaron Rodgers and then have Malik Willis sit behind him, like they're kind of doing in front of Tannehill. Except Malik Willis, obviously, he played a couple games this season and he did not look good at all, so they would imagine Aaron Rodgers can help him out a little bit more in that regard. So that's one pick. But I know a big aspect of getting Aaron Rodgers is he has to want to go to your team, of course. And the Titans obviously have Derrick Henry, and then they do have Treylon Burks. But other than that, I'm not sure if Rodgers would rather go to them or the Jets. I'll get back on the Jets, of course, a little bit more later. But the next team that would also be looking for Rodgers would be the Colts. And the Colts, if they get Rodgers, they just be kind of enforcing that cycle where they get kind of like the old former like all-pro, Pro Bowl level QBs like Phillip Rivers, all the guys like Carson Wentz, and hoping to have something left in the tank for them, and then they kind of just flame out with them. So I don't think, from what I can tell, they don't want to do that, but I won't be surprised if they obviously try to make a call to the Packers, try to get him for those 2 first-round picks. But from what I can tell, I don't think that's going to happen. But next team actually has a little bit more odds than I think the sports betting people are giving them credit for, and that would be the Las Vegas Raiders, because obviously Rodgers would get back with Devontae Adams. Not sure if Devontae Adams left Green Bay because of Rodgers or because of some other circumstances or whatever, but Rodgers or Devontae Adams, we know how that goes. That's an all-pro duo right there. That could be interesting. But then, of course, the last team that was mentioned would be the New England Patriots. And I already kind of hear some rumors the Patriots are going to be trying to get Lamar Jackson and a couple other QBs. But, of course, I'm pretty sure Bill Belichick would want to ask at least what would be the price for them to get Rodgers. And he can help them a little bit. They have an above average wide receiver core. Mac Jones can sit behind him as well. So that's another interesting pairing as well. But I think, as I mentioned before, the Jets would probably be not only both the most likeliest, but also they would have, I think, the best system for Rodgers to go into, just because with the Jets, they have a really good defense, and that came together much faster than what most people thought they would. And I think even their GM, Joe Douglas, thought they'd have a couple more years before they would be really there. And obviously this year, when they were playing in the season, the defense was really good. It was mainly their offense. They couldn't really get any drives going, especially from an old Joe Flacco, Mike White is serviceable, but he's been a little bit injury prone, especially with that rib injury. Then Zach Wilson doesn't really seem to be, I don't know if immature would be the right word, but he just does not have what it takes mentally to be the a quarterback, especially in some market like New York. It's obviously a lot more cameras, a lot more lights, a lot more media attention. I don't think he was ready for that level. I think a lot more people expected a lot more out of him. I'm not sure what's going on there either. So having Aaron Rodgers to steer the ship, especially on offense, would be just much better than what they have already, of course. And then Rodgers would have weapons. You'd have Breece Hall, Garrett Wilson, and Elijah Moore. He also has Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzomah as tight ends, but I think a lot of the receiver production and receiving work the Jets had could have been a lot better. Of course, if they had a consistent quarterback who played all the games and didn't get hurt and whatnot. So if Rodgers does play all 17 games, I think the risk, all those or even Breece Hall's numbers on rushing as well would just go way up, just based on the fact that they don't have to worry about playing for a new QB. It seemed like every other week they had a QB injured, they would put someone else in, or like halfway through a game they would put someone in for a drive or whatever. The Jets was like a lot of the quarterbacks got a lot of different playing time, which for receivers, of course, that sucks because they just want to get used to having one guy throw them the ball instead of having a bunch of other guys kind of go around. So even Chris Trevor got in there as well. So I think having Rodgers as a consistent number one force that's not going to be exactly sitting getting benched, going to be he's not really injury prone either. So that's going to help him a lot going forward as well. As I mentioned before, they had Nathaniel Hackett, so he's going to have a little bit more leeway in that system. He's going to know what to expect going forward when he gets to New York, rather than having someone completely different. Maybe they butt heads, kind of like what happened when Matt LaFleur first went to Green Bay. So for me, it does make the most sense on why the Jets would want him and why Aaron Rodgers would want to go to the Jets. I feel they already have a defense, so it's not like something like before where when Aaron Rodgers was in his prime, everyone knows that he would have to put up 40 just for the Packers to be in games, and if they didn't put up 40, they would lose because their defense would give like 45, especially in the playoffs, where their defense would give like 50, 45, etc., etc. So this makes a lot of sense. He'd have a defense. He doesn't have to worry about always having to come back from behind. He would have a couple weapons, of course, and then he can elevate those further. He has an offensive corner he's already used to, of course. So that obviously helps him a lot more. So it does make sense why the Jets would be the betting favorites, and they're a good amount ahead of the Titans, like 150 points. So it's obvious. I'm not sure if they know something you don't already, or what's the story with that. But from what I can tell, just looking at what the Jets have compared to some of the other teams in the AFC who are looking for a quarterback, it seems the Jets would be the best choice for Rodgers right now. In other NFL news, Frank Reich, the former Indianapolis coach, and he's also the offensive coordinator for the Philadelphia Eagles team who won the Super Bowl in 2017. He got hired pretty quickly. He got hired to the Panthers, the first head coach hiring. He signed a 4-year contract, and no one really knows so far the financial part of it or any of that kind of stuff. We still have a 4-year contract with the Panthers, and that was signed yesterday. And of course, first team to sign a head coach. And so I have a couple thoughts. This is mainly regarding the Panthers organization as a whole, rather than just Frank Reich. But of course, first thing would just be, I'm pretty sure Frank Reich was a hiring to steer the quarterback ship, because we've known that the Carolina Panthers have been a revolving door of that for a while now. They're having they drafted Matt Corral, he got hurt. Baker Mayfield was supposed to save them, that didn't really work out. Then PJ Walker had to step in for a few games, and then Sam Darnold came back and kind of was a little bit more consistent once Matt Rule was fired. But then even last year they brought back Cam Newton for a couple of games. It's just, they hope a quarterback or so they hope they can get a good quarterback from like a Cleveland or Jets or like kind of another dysfunctional team and try to fix them. But that's just not what's happening. Of course, they have Matt Rule. Matt Rule's not a good head coach at all. He was not a good head coach, to be specific. So having a guy like Frank Reich, who's worked with Carson Wentz and he's worked with a couple other guys in Indy, would make a lot more sense. And for Frank Reich's perspective, I'm not sure if this is the case or not, but they might draft a new QB for him just because they're in the ninth spot on the draft, and the way's kind of looking, they would probably have to trade up to grab Will Levis unless something happens and he falls to them. So I'm not sure if the Raiders would want to pick him up or not, and then you can trade up. Secondly, they can also try to get Anthony Richardson, but Anthony Richardson for kind of what people are projecting to be a really big physical talent, boomer bust prospect. For them to kind of reach for him at that would be a little risky, especially for kind of what Frank Reich's first year. They'd probably rather get someone a little bit more of a higher ceiling, not necessarily, but more of a higher floor, if that makes sense. But of course, the main thing is I'm not sure if the Panthers situation might be too much better, because I know their ownership group is a little bit more meddling, and then of course they still have a lot of uncertainty with the QB spot, because I don't know if it's gonna be Sam Darnold. Of course, they might even draft a QB. We really don't know, of course, until obviously the draft rolls around, or they might trade for one. Who really knows with that? But personally, I thought that the Panthers should have hired Steve Wilks, because not only was he there, of course, for the end of the last half of the season where he took over from Matt Rule. I feel Steve Wilks really deserves to be a full-time head coach, because the only other chance he had was with the Arizona Cardinals back in 2018, and that was obviously just a big tank year for them. He was hired to be basically a tank commander, and then the second they got Kyler Murray, they got Cliff Kingsbury, and then gave Steve Wilks the boot. I feel Steve Wilks, they already had knowledge of what he can do with the Carolina Panthers. They obviously played a lot better with him than without him when Matt Rule was there. So that makes sense to me why they. I understand why they got Frank Reich, because they probably want someone who's more offensively oriented rather than a defensive coordinator. But I still feel if Steve Wilks was allowed to pick his staff, maybe hire a little bit more of a seasoned offensive coordinator who can call the plays really well, I don't think that would have been too much of a problem. And then seeming at the locker room, all the players, a lot of the other guys in the building really like Steve Wilks, his leadership. He seems to have them dialed in, even when towards the end of the season, where I was kind of really shaky enough they would even be able to retain the playoff spot or not. So I thought that he was their best choice, but obviously they picked Frank Reich over them. So who really knows how that's going to go going forward? And I'm pretty sure another team would love to get Steve Wilks as the head coach, but we'll have to see about that going forward. But it's going to be interesting to see what Frank Reich could do, because that team's been looking for someone who can develop a quarterback for a while. These haven't had that. Never had like an actual quarterback who hasn't been stunted by another team or not in a while either. So we'll have to really see on how that goes forward with the Carolina Panthers. Kind of shifting from the NFL to the NBA, especially with the NBA kind of going in full stride right now. It's going to be the All-Star break pretty soon. Kind of a lot to talk about right there. But first thing I wanted to mention would be the Portland Trail Blazers right now. Everyone's kind of talking about them, so might as well jump on that train. But we have a couple things, just mainly Damian Lillard still playing on an all-star level right now. He dropped 60 on the Jazz like the other night. But the main thing that kind of hurts the Blazers right now is just that their lack of depth is really hurting them, and that's showing just because they're in the 12th seed right now, and that's out of the play-in tournament. And it's just the continued lack of success when they have Damian Lillard at the helm. He was always able to get them to the first round of the playoffs. Normally, he might win a series or two, but then he's only made the Western Conference one time. He got destroyed by the Warriors, obviously. When it comes to that, though, it was the Golden State Warriors with KD and all those guys back in the day. So I understand that was a really difficult team for any other team in the league to beat, and it took some super really good teams or to even stand a chance against them. So obviously the Blazers were not those teams at all. So it makes sense why they were never able to really get past the second round. But still, they just had such a lack of success with Damian Lillard when it comes to trying to get him a championship. And the main thing with the Blazers is always the same thing where they win maybe a playoff series, they get in the playoffs, but they never really make it to the Western Conference. They never win the Western Conference, let alone the finals. And then, of course, with Damian Lillard, they're way too good to tank, just because right now, if they want to get in the Wembanyama sweepstakes, they have a 10-game lead or deficit. It depends on how you want to look at tanking over the Houston Rockets, and especially also the Spurs, Hornets, Pistons, a lot of those teams that are really just sucking it up right now. They have no way to really kind of see down below those teams. So even if they try to just say, well, we're just gonna shut a lot of players down, just try to maybe get like a really good prospect for Damian Lillard to hop him out a little bit, I won't really work out for them either. But of course, this is not all too bad, just because right now, even if they're playing really mediocre right now, there's a silver lining that in the Western Conference, it's just absolutely ripping itself apart right now. The only teams that have a real lead would be the Nuggets and the Grizzlies. They have a 12, 13 game lead over some like the 12 seed, 13 seed, 11 seed teams right now, just because every other team, it's like literally if you have, it's a 4 game difference. So and NBA, if that could mean if like the Dallas Mavericks are I believe on the 5th seed right now, if they drop a couple games and another team goes on a little bit of a win streak, that just instantly shoots them up and they could be like in the 11th seed, which is not even good enough for the plan. But because how so compact the West is, how competitive it is, so many teams are only 1 game below 500, maybe 1 game below 500, or right around 500. So it's really jam packed, really tough to kind of break away from the pack. But if the Blazers can get there, of course, they got a little bit of a hot streak behind Damian Lillard. They can get a pretty good seeding, but even so, I'm not sure how far they can go, just because right now, as you mentioned before, it's really tough in the West to determine who is actually really good, who's not good, just because a lot of players are injured. Like, I know Kawhi Leonard and Paul George they're both kind of injured right now. The Lakers have a bunch of kind of injuries. I know the OKC is kind of missing some players. I know SJ missed some time. So a lot of guys in like the kind of bottom realm are missing some time. Luka got he sprained his ankle last night, so that could really shoot that Mavericks down a little bit. So who knows where the West will settle? Just because if a team misses like one player, that can just drop them. If they bring back another player from injury and they can go on a little bit of a run, that shoots them up way more than it would in every other year. But of course, there's the other option, which people obviously have been talking about trading Damian Lillard forever now, ever since for like years now. People have been saying, well, Dame should want out, that he should ask out, etc., etc. I don't, from what I can tell and from everything he said, that he'll never want to leave Portland just because they drafted him. He came from like a D3 school, so obviously he owes them a lot, and he feels he owes them a lot. He feels that he should never leave. He's built his family there. He has a lot of ties to the community. He's really active there, so he doesn't want to leave just because he feels that it's more important for him to just be a part of the Portland community rather than just trying to go ring chase like a lot of other players have been, or just trying to go win titles and trying to chase some of the glory for himself. That's how he feels about that. And I don't think he'd ever request a trade. And because of that, I think if they ever do trade Damian Lillard, it's only because the Blazers are going to probably get an offer they can't resist. And if you're the Portland Trailblazers, obviously Damian Lillard is more than a fan favorite. He's a superstar and probably the best player they've ever had in their franchise history at this point. He's probably better than Clyde Drexler was, for example. So right now, if you're the Portland Trailblazers, you can keep him for another couple years. He's he's going to sell at the arena they have over there. He's always going to bring in fans. People are always going to tune in the highlights. But you can also kind of think about it where you can do that, or you can trade them for probably a bunch of picks. Because I know right now, the NBA, as I mentioned before in my last couple of videos, the NBA trademark is so skewed right now. Like, people, the Raptors want 3 first-rounders for OG Anunoby. The Pistons want 2 for unprotected for Bogdan Bogdanovic. A lot of guys who maybe would have gotten 1 before now are getting 3. Obviously, as I mentioned before, with the Rudy Gobert stuff, he got like he basically like almost 6 first-round picks for him. So now that we've seen that before, Donovan Mitchell, I believe, got traded for 4 first-round picks. I imagine Damian Lillard can probably get at least 4 first-round picks. And for the Blazers right now, Damian Lillard's stock is back up again. He's lighting teams up. He's dropping 60, 50. He dropped 60 off like almost 90% shooting percentage. It was insane. Like, he could not miss. He went from like 9 of 10 from 3, I believe. He was just going crazy, obviously, in that game. So right now, people are turning back into Dame. They're kind of remembering who he was and the superstar he can be. So if you're the Blazers, you can think about it where obviously he's not going to request a trade because he's not that kind of player, but you can still trade him because he's still on the rights to his contract and all that. You trade him to another team, flip back maybe 4 first-round picks, 5 maybe even. I have no idea. And maybe a couple young prospects or not. And then you can have Anthony Simons take over, because I know when Damian Lillard was not playing last year, he was playing really good. He was averaging almost like 24, 25 points per game without Damian Lillard. And obviously, you not to pay him the same level Damian Lillard gets. So, and then you can have a lot more picks to build around, of course, rebuild to the draft, and then kind of just build a homegrown team. Just because, unfortunately, in the NBA, your city matters a lot more than it matters in other sports, because first, there's no real like actual salary cap, not like in the NFL where you can't spend over like 200 million or whatever it is every year. And then if your owner is rich enough, he can buy whatever he wants. He can get whatever player he wants. And I know for a fact after a while there's the luxury tax, and that can really make team building expensive. Obviously, when they split that much, but then of course, Portland's not exactly the free agent destination. We all know that, especially NBA, LA, New York, Miami, and even like Chicago to an extent as well. Those cities are rumored like every free agent whenever that period comes around, and a lot of players obviously would rather go play for the Bulls because they idolize the Bulls growing up. The Lakers, Heat, Knicks, a lot of NBA players love that spotlight. Portland doesn't really bring them that, so they're not going to really be able to sign a couple of free agents and then kind of go from there. So they have to draft smart. They have to make good trades as well. And if they do trade Damian Lillard, and if they can obviously get a bunch of prospects back, a bunch of picks, and then they can develop those picks, that can really be a really good long-term investment. But of course, they'd have to nail those picks. They'd have to make sure that no player wants to trade out, nothing kind of fishy happens, or no tampering, because I know that happens in the NBA a lot. But that's all an idea. I don't think people are too much talking, because people are talking about it. If he does get traded, that Damian Lillard should ask out, rather than if the Blazers are smart. People are not really saying that the Blazers can flip them for a bunch of picks, a bunch of young players, develop them, and then of course they'll be able to kind of build for the future. People are not really talking about it from that perspective. But if you're the Blazers, and especially with how Damian Lillard is in his 30s now, that's something you can really do. You can really do, and you can probably be able to rebuild successfully if that's what you want to do going forward. So obviously that was Portland Trailblazers kind of segment. But then I have to talk about the 76ers right now. They're a really interesting team right now, just because right now they're the second seed in the Eastern Conference. They have an MVP candidate in Joel Embiid. And right now they have James Harden kind of resurging a little bit. He's not Houston James Harden, who dropped like 35 every night, but he's still really solid wingman for Embiid. But I've been seeing Doc Rivers play around with an interesting lineup where he has Tyrese Maxey coming off the bench, and Maxey off the bench is really interesting just because he's obviously a starter caliber guard in the NBA, but just because they really have such a lack of depth, having him come off the bench not only kind of helps their depth just because he's coming off the bench other than starting, but he's a real spark guy. He can really get some buckets. That's really interesting to kind of see right now. And the main thing with the Sixers I mentioned before, they have two really good players, and obviously Tyrese Maxey's up there as well. But the main thing is just gonna be if they can get some, maybe in the buyout market once we kind of figure that out. Maybe if they are able to trade a couple picks for some more depth, that can be a real threat in the East, just because right now, at least in the Eastern Conference, if the West is way more compact and there's way more competition, the Eastern Conference is way more top heavy. So getting a really good seed matters, because the way the East is kind of breaking down right now is just that if you are the 4th seed, you have to play a really good 5th seed. Let me just show you this, guys. It's because if the West is a lot more compact, the East is a lot more top heavy, and then the Eastern Conference, if you're the 1st seed, like the Celtics right now, you gotta play the Hawks, for really kind of mediocre. That's probably really easy first round. But if you're a 4th seed, the 5th seed is a real challenge, because if you're the Nets, you have to play the Cavs, and the Cavs are no joke. Really good team right now, really competitive. They have a lot of good players who, obviously right now, the people are kind of wondering if Evan Mobley and some of the other guys will develop and what's going on at that 3 spot. But if they can sort that out, and if Mobley takes a little bit of a jump, Cavaliers as a 5th seed with Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Jared Allen, that's a really tough out, especially for the first round. And then if you're the Bucks, the Heat, I have no idea right now, just because they were looking so bad. They were able to really climb up right now. So, and the Heat have beat them in the playoffs before as an underdog, so you have to really take that into account. So that's why the Sixers being in the 2nd slot, they can probably beat the Knicks relatively easy, of course. So it matters that they're standing in the first 2 seasons in the East, because it's not like in the West where you still have, if you're the number 1 seed Nuggets, you have to play the Warriors of the AFC, who And that's a really crazy ask for an 8th seed. While you got to play the Hawks in the East, so obviously that's a lot easier of an ask if you're in the Eastern Conference for a top 2 seed. Just don't make sure you're not in those 3, 4, 5 spots, because those first rounds are no joke, especially for a first round. And then of course in the second round, you don't have to only a couple of those teams are really going to make it out, obviously. So you really have to make sure that if the Sixers do want to go on a real playoff run, they have a shot. It's because right now they're still in the second spot. It's because Giannis has been hurt, Chris Middleton has been hurt, the Cavs are still kind of piecing team together. KD's been hurt, Kyrie's missed some time as well. So those teams have been kind of dealing with some injury issues. So they have to still keep their foot on the gas, make sure they build a couple more games to the leaders, because the Bucks only like 1 game back. So you have to really take that into account for the Eastern Conference and all that stuff. Just because it's kind of just segues into the East seeding. The East is for how much top heavy teams there are. If you from the Celtics, Sixers, Bucks, Nets, Cavaliers, and the Heat, only one of those teams, a couple of those teams are gonna lose in the first round. Like, it's gonna be crazy that if the Nets are gonna be a first round exit, and that's a real possibility. Same thing with the Bucks, the Heat, Cavs too. And those teams are looking really sharp early. Obviously, they kind of tapered down a little bit, but just saying that the Nets can be a real first round exit is really crazy. Just because you know how crazy they're playing earlier in the years. Just because they have to play another really good team in the first round, then a second round, of course. The Celtics will just play the lower seeds. That can just be like the Cavs or the Heat or whatever, and they can probably take them down. But just if you're the Sixers, you can play like the Bucks, for example, and that's a super hard team to beat, especially in the playoffs. Giannis we all know he's a beast. Chris Middleton in the playoffs, he can have his games he looks really bad, and the other games he looks like Kobe Bryant. He's just not missing a shot. And Drew Holiday's, especially when he's been asked to play the a number 1 kind of scorer on this year, because as I mentioned before, Giannis, Chris have been hurt. He's been stepping up, so I can really prepare him. So if he's a number 2 option, that can be a big problem, especially with how much better his jump shot has gone as when he's been with the Bucks. So that's another thing you really want to have to consider going forward, just because if you have to meet the Bucks in the second round, there's no guarantee. Even if you're right now the Sixers are playing good, there's no guarantee you make it out the second round. And we've all known the Sixers haven't made it out of the second round since like Allen Iverson maybe was part of that team. So they really want to break that curse. From what I can tell, you're gonna have to get a little bit more depth, in my opinion, for them to kind of break this, because they're gonna have to get to the Bucks or the Nets, and those two teams, they have Kyrie, KD respectively, and then the other ones have, as I mentioned before, Giannis, Chris, Drew. Those are real tough teams. They're not the beast, especially if that's a conference finals almost matchup. But with how top heavy the East is, I'm mentioning, keep harping on, that's gonna be a tough out for the Sixers. But also kind of moving on from that though, I want to talk about the NBA All-Star game. That has a lot of people kind of riled up. I want to give my 2 cents on that, just because obviously there's a couple snubs, but every year there's an All-Star snub, it feels like. But let me start off with the West. Obviously LeBron James is the captain. He's the 19th All-Star time. 19th All-Star time. He's obviously in the West, we have LeBron James, who's a 19 time All-Star, which ties Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and he might break his scoring record, which is really crazy how the length of LeBron's career. But also we have Luka Doncic, we have Steph Curry as their guards. Makes sense. Even Stephen Curry has been hurt. Stephen Curry, when he's been playing, absolute beast. We all know how good he is. Luka, same thing with him. Jokic makes a lot of sense. He's an MVP candidate, probably the best in the league right now. Then the main thing people kind of were talking about would be Zion Williamson instead of Domantas Sabonis or Larry Markkinen. And for the Markkinen, it makes a little bit of sense. I'm gonna talk about that in a second. But for Sabonis, 19 points compared to Zion's 26 points. I understand why Zion would make it over him, but Larry Markkinen, he averages almost 25 points per game on 60 true shooting percentage, which is a little bit on lower points, but a little bit higher of a percentage than Zion. And he's only missed like 5 games, while Zion's missed almost half the Pelican season right now. So I do feel that to a certain extent, Larry Markkinen was snubbed, because Larry Markkinen's been playing really good basketball, especially for people who thought that he was like kind of like a throwaway piece in that Donovan Mitchell trade. But he's been proving his worth. He's been keeping that Jazz team around the 500 mark, even if they slowed down from how good they were in the start of the season. Larry Markkinen's a beast. He kind of does everything right now for the Jazz. He's physical. He can shoot the ball. He has a good mid-range game. He's just a beast all around for them, Jazz, as I mentioned before. He really can do anything special on offense. Pretty good defender while Zion Williamson has been hurt. We all know how good Zion is when he's healthy, but the main issue is he's that big, he's that strong, he's that athletic. His body obviously can't take too much of that just because the way he's built, and it shows with how much games he's missed. He missed all of last year because of that foot injury. He's missed almost half of this year already due to a hamstring strain. So I do understand just why people would feel that Larry Markkinen should have gone in over Zion, but at the same time, you have to also consider from the NBA perspective, Zion Williamson's been a phenom since high school. He's had like mixtapes since he was high school. He was a monster at Duke. He was a super hype #1 overall pick. It makes more sense that if he is healthy or whatever by the time the All-Star game starts, they'd want to have him over Larry Markkinen. Larry Markkinen's obviously finished. He's not as well known. He's really only had this is his first season. He really looked like a real beast, a real all-star. While Sam Wilson has looked like an all-star before, of course. But moving on to the Eastern side of things, we have Kevin Durant as a forward, Kyrie Irving as a guard. Makes sense. And if you don't like what they have to say off the court, they're both real good basketball players, and no one can really deny that. Giannis is the captain. He's an MVP candidate. I'm not going to argue with that at all. Donovan Mitchell was his first all-star starter. Really good. He's been averaging almost 27 points per game for the Cavs. Really good player, obviously. I'm not going to harp on that. He's a really good guard spot. Jason Tatum as the third frontcourt player. He's been an MVP candidate too. A lot of MVP candidates, as you can tell. He's been averaging almost 31 points per game, so it makes sense. Also, he's the best player on the best team right now in the NBA for the Celtics, so makes a little bit more sense. Makes a lot more sense, but the main thing for the East is there's one player that's not on there, and that's Joel Embiid from the 76ers, who is an MVP candidate, averaging 33.4 points per game, which, in fact, is leading the league in scoring. He did that last year, and he's doing it again right now. And I'm very surprised that he didn't make the starters because over Giannis, I understand why they didn't put him over Giannis and over Tatum, but KD's hurt right now, and KD's KD's having a great season, but he's not having the season Embiid is having. This just shows how talented the NBA is right now. But KD was averaging 29 points per game last time I checked before he got hurt, of course. Well, obviously Joel Embiid is averaging way more points per game, and the Sixers are the #2 team in the East. So for me, I thought the way it should have gone was that Joel Embiid over KD, especially because KD is hurt with that MCL sprain. It would make sense. 3 frontcourt players, Embiid, Giannis, Tatum. That's a really balanced frontcourt. Makes a lot of sense to me, but for some reason they left Joel Embiid out, which for me is crazy because he's literally averaging the most points per game in the league right now. He's a top 2 MVP candidate, and he still can't even make the All-Star starter team. Obviously, the All-Star starters, it doesn't matter too much in all honesty, it's because it's gonna be on your record that you're an All-Star either way, but still kind of feels like a big snub to me, especially with how good Joel Embiid's having, just because I'm not a guy who only looks at only certain stars. I want to see everyone kind of evaluated equally. That's why I'm kind of pro Larry Markkinen over Zion, for example. Even if Zion's a much more famous player than Larry Markkinen is, I feel the same way with KD. Obviously, everyone knows who KD is, while Embiid he's obviously a superstar, but he's still not on that same level, of course, as well recognized. But still, I do feel that Joel Embiid should have been in over Kevin Durant. But obviously, my vote would only be 50% because fan votes only 50%. Then after a while, it's based on media votes and player votes. And I know some of the players were voting Chet Holmgren for like All-Star, and he hasn't even played a single game in the NBA yet. So obviously, who knows if they even take that seriously or not. And that could have been why maybe Embiid didn't get it over Kevin Durant, but still feel that's a bit of a snub. And other than that, though, I feel I mostly agree with the All-Stars, obviously, other than the Zion pick, for example, as well. And I think it's going to be a pretty fun All-Star game just because we won't know who's on the teams until we get to the actual game. And like 10 minutes before the tip-off, Giannis and LeBron James are going to pick basically kind of playground style or street style, where it's going to pick their guys in front of the crowd. That'll probably be really fun to see the reaction and all that. We all know the GM is probably going to pick a way better team than Giannis does, but that's going to be fun to see, obviously, but we'll get there when we get there. But that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for sticking around for this long. If you have anything, just make sure to comment down below. Make sure to subscribe and all that. I'll see you guys later.